All right, so we welcome everyone who are joining right now. We're very happy to have you here. And we're gonna get started with our first webinar presented by the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice, YSSCoP. And today we're gonna talk about very special topic in concerns of paraprofessionals in social service workforce system. So to introduce our co-champion, can I go to the next slide, please? Let's welcome Bonnie Politz. She is the champion of the community of practice. And my name is Mike Hernandez. I'm based in El Salvador. Bonnie, where are you at?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm in Washington, D.C. with springtime budding away. So welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have our colleagues from the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance with us. And go ahead, Mike.
And I'm Mike. I'm from El Salvador in Central America. We're having this amazing, beautiful, and hot summer in Central America right now. So welcome, everyone. Next, please. Just to have some housekeeping, I will remind you to please mute yourself when not speaking and keep your cameras off in the larger group. Post questions in the chat at any time, and a caption is available right there at the bottom when you can click the CC button so you can have the closed captioning. And remember that this meeting is going to be recorded, and the recording will be shared later at youthpower.org. If you have technical issues, you can please contact Stephanie Schmidt in the private message, Stephanie s@makingsense.com. Today, we're having a very fruitful agenda. We will have some introductions. We will have the overview of the YSSCoP and the Youth System Collaborative Framework. We will have the amazing presentation by our guest, Hugh Salmon. We have a discussion, and at the end, we will have the slides of coming up in the Learning Network events, so you can be in touch with us throughout the Learning Network. Bonnie, over to you.
Thanks. So this is the third year of the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice, and it's part of Youth Power, which is a funding mechanism under USAID. And is really supported by the USAID youth policy, which we hope everyone is familiar with. It has in its revised version a focus on systems change. So we were very excited to see that. So this particular community of practice is focusing on learning from our global audiences about what's really happening in communities, in countries, in societies, where systems are actually being reformed that directly impact and have the roles of young people embedded in them. So while we know there are lots of wonderful programs out there and they get shared and we need to know how they work and how they're evaluated, this particular focus is on how systems change. And we're using a framework that's been established by the Youth Systems Collaborative, and that you can see from the picture. It has a variety of ways to tell what we're learning about systems change from a policy perspective, about finance and resource flows, how mindsets are actually getting changed. And you'll see all the pieces of that: vision and goals, systems mapping. And we use this in each of the community of practice, the YSSCoP community of practice, either webinars or coffee chats, for people to be able to tell exactly what they're doing and what they're learning and the impact that's going on. We go to the next slide. So the Youth Systems Collaborative is about almost 6 years old now, and it is made up of these international development organizations. We meet once a month and actually use the framework. We have written articles, we have a learning agenda. We're starting to do hopefully some more push-out work about what actually is happening in countries and communities related to changes in systems. But it's really exciting to have what are typically competitive groups sitting around a table and really trying to share what's being learned about systems change to really benefit the field of youth work and youth systems. So the next one, Mike.
All right, and to be connected with us, you can join the network of Youth Power in youthpoweryouth.org. You can register, connect with us, and share resources you will have access to our webinar recording, our webinar events, and some other COPs that are in the network of Youth Power. So please welcome everyone and enjoy this webinar.
Okay.
Bonnie?
So I want to, very excited to introduce our speakers. First of all, not first, they're all first. Hugh Salmon, who's the director of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, who will be taking us through a presentation. And then we're going to open this up for a discussion and hopefully go into some breakout rooms, or depending on the numbers, we may all stay together. I want to introduce Zeni Thumbadu, who is the Deputy Director of South Africa's National Association of Childcare, and Rebecca Davis, who is at the State University of New York, working as an assistant professor for professional practice and director of the Office of Global Programs. And they are very involved with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, which is great. So they have a lot to share about some very exciting things that are going on. So Hugh, I'm going to send this over to you and we'll all come back together after we hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks, Bonnie. And it's wonderful to have this chance to speak to such an interesting and diverse group of colleagues. I haven't had many chances since I started in this role a couple of years ago to speak to a specifically youth audience or audience of people who work with youth. So we're very interested in hearing from you. We have some connections with those who work as child and youth care practitioners, and Zeni in particular will be speaking to that later, or Zeni is a representative of that community. But we believe there's a much wider workforce of people who are working with youth in different forms, which we'll discuss later. And so it's great to have that chance to connect, because historically we've worked a lot in the child protection space and care system reform. But it's great to sort of widen that out to the sort of wider youth cohort. So just my brief talk today will be about embedding paraprofessionals in social service workforce systems and how to uplift and expand their role, looking at the cross-sectoral systems that impact youth and families. So really connecting the things that we most work on, which is strengthening the wider workforce, with the things that Youth Power 2 works on and the systems focus that Bonnie referred to. Next slide, please. So just briefly to introduce you to the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, you can find a link to our website at the bottom and you can join. We encourage anybody to join. It's very straightforward, and then you'll receive our newsletters. And obviously have opportunities to participate in other events such as this, and also we do things together in developing new resources. We have over 3,200 members at the moment across many countries, as you can see, all regions. We work to build a social service workforce that's knowledgeable, capable, critically reflective, resilient, and committed. And we're a convener, so we bring people together across our network from many different backgrounds. The core of our membership are people who are in some way strengthening their workforce in their country or across a region or even globally. But the membership in the Alliance is free, and it brings many opportunities to engage, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. So some of you, if anybody has been to a talk that I've given before, you've probably seen this slide before, but it's kind of our opener, because we just explain why we came into being and what we mean by the social service workforce. So 10 years ago, there was a number of organizations globally came together, recognizing that there was a gap in terms of recognizing and strengthening the wider social service workforce. There were already organizations nationally and globally to promote professional social work, and that has a very important role. But the wider social service workforce, just like you need a wider health workforce, not just doctors, and you need a wider education workforce, not just teachers. In the same way, there is a need for a wider social service workforce. On the right-hand side, you can see a variety of roles, some of which you may recognize. You may have other roles and titles that are used in your context, and of course, there will be different multiple translations of those. But you can see in there are child and youth care workers, and of course, community workers and youth workers of different types are reflected. And then on the left, we talk about the social service workforce as this inclusive concept that covers governmental and non-governmental professionals, so people with a degree or a master's and maybe a licensed professional, but also paraprofessionals who are tasked, often but not always paid, supervised, trained, but not necessarily with a specific qualification. So that's the kind of the difference between the paraprofessional and the licensed professional. And so we embrace both types, but we also work with community volunteers with whom there is an overlap with paraprofessionals too, as long as they are trained and supervised and have a clear remit. And of course, that range of people works with a wide range of people, and they do so at multiple levels: prevention, response to provide services when a problem has already been identified, and promotion of the wider issues that we're all working on, that the sort of joint advocacy that we do. And in doing so, they operate at the level of individual families and communities, which we call the micro level, the mezzo level of groups and communities at large, and then macro at the national level and the policy things that Bonnie was referring to as well. Next slide, please. So I won't dwell on this one because there's a lot of information in here, but it's actually a framework that we've developed together with UNICEF for strengthening. Initially, it was particularly applied to the child protection workforce, but it has application for the wider social service workforce. And really, we're trying to say that there are different components of system strengthening. There is the planning, which is really around working out how many you need, in what roles, what they're going to cost, and sort of how you're going to sort of build and pay for your system. Having a strategic approach to doing that over the long term. Developing the workforce is really around the capacity building, training, education, ongoing professional development to develop a full competence, not just theoretical knowledge. And then supporting the workforce is really recognizing that it's a stressful job, and they often need to overcome stress, prevent burnout. So they need high quality supervision to enable reflective practice. They need tools and resources to do the job well. And many times it's helpful to have a professional association that can champion their work and provide them with an ethical basis and also advocate for what they do more widely. But all of that, the box in the middle is saying it has to be done within a specific country context. It's not a one size fits all. How this is done, it will be adapted to the context and the needs and the resources of a particular country. Next slide, please. So over the last few years, we've been working on trying to explore the ways in which not only professional social workers, but other social service workers with the different kinds of roles that I referred to before, how they can work not just in the social welfare system, but also across other systems and settings, such as in community health centers or district hospitals, doing outreach to address the social determinants of health, of which we heard a lot during COVID, because we know that certain people were particularly vulnerable to COVID, but that applies to a range of different forms of illness and ill health. And so that enables a more holistic approach to prevention and supporting treatment. In schools, you know, there's a critical role for prevention, identifying children and youth at risk, protecting children. And I think youth workers often do link with schools in that way. So I think this is definitely important in the youth space. In justice settings too, and of course it's particularly important to look at the role that they play in the justice settings, that in addressing again social determinants of youth offending, the vulnerability of certain children and youth to involvement in criminal activities because of their background. But also it's really important that we explore and promote the role that the workforce can play in diversion from custody, alternatives to the formal court processes and the formal custody, and restorative justice, working together with victims and really helping the offender or the accused to learn from their behavior and not repeat that, and to put back into the community. So that's really also working with victims and witnesses for a more child and youth friendly justice approach. So there's a lot of things in that's crossing over into the justice system. And then in humanitarian settings, we've seen so much recently around, you know, COVID was a humanitarian situation affecting us all. Climate change is going to result in an acceleration of humanitarian situations. And that puts the social service workforce front and center of the preparedness and the response, building resilience. And that will definitely include community volunteers and paraprofessionals, as well as the professionals that I referred to earlier. Next slide, please. So in all of this, we feel that the paraprofessionals that I referred to, so people who aren't coming necessarily with a professional degree or licensed degree, maybe particularly people from the communities that they serve. They really have a first line of response, because it's really hard to have professional social workers in every community, particularly the most remote communities. It just is very rare in countries, particularly low and middle income countries, to have enough social work graduates. And even those that might go there, they often don't stay very long because the working conditions are very tough, and they might be very, very miserable salaries, unfortunately. And so they might want to get back into a kind of head office job or an INGO job or government job. So often it's more sustainable, more acceptable sometimes to communities to have a workforce who is very much from that community. Maybe mature people may be coming into the workforce at different stages in their life, but it's also a great opportunity for youth volunteers who might transition for just serving on one issue on a Saturday or in their holidays, actually transition into becoming a more regular volunteer and then a paraprofessional. And they may in turn be more accepted and trusted in that context, and that would overcome language and cultural barriers of somebody coming in from a distant city. So that's the thing that we think is really central. We've developed guidance on this area, but we really would like to work further with colleagues to see a little bit more how we can promote the role of the paraprofessionals. And for that, they need to have clear procedures, training, and supervision, as well as being respected and recognized. I think there's a big risk in volunteers just being taken for granted and sometimes even exploited, effectively being given work that's more challenging than they could possibly be able to do. Particularly that happened in COVID, when the professional workforce was more inaccessible, couldn't travel, and often the community of volunteers were relied upon, but sometimes without thinking what kind of training, supervision, and stipends they need to do the job safely, or not thinking how to divide the task so that the professionals do the more in-depth casework, but the paraprofessionals and community volunteers have a key role in identifying those who need services and connecting them to the services that are available. Next slide, please. I think I'm nearly done now. So just want to briefly reference the fact that we have been working in this cycle. You can see the importance of policy. So we've been trying to develop tools which strengthen policy for the social service workforce. In Uganda, we've helped develop a national framework for strengthening the social service workforce. And across the whole East Asia Pacific region, working with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, we've helped develop a roadmap with those governments and with the support of UNICEF. And now we're working on embedding that roadmap and implementing that roadmap for the strengthening of social work across that whole region. So that's an example of how we're trying to work at the policy and systems level. Next slide, please. So we're also looking at resource flows because this is fundamental to strengthening the workforce. So that we need to make a clear investment case. And often people in ministries of finance or donors say, we know how much it costs to build hospitals and schools and how many teachers and doctors and nurses we need, but we just don't know how much it costs to have social service workers, or how many are needed, or how many youth workers do you need for a certain need or a certain target population. So we're trying to strengthen that investment case by having very specific tools to enable planners to work out the ratio of workers they need to a given population, and then what will be the basis for costing, sustainably costing, not just salaries, but training, supervision, the resources they need, the vehicle, the transport costs, the computers, the meeting rooms. All those things have to be costed to have an effective workforce in the long-term budget for the government. So that's the work that we're doing in that area. We've got some guidance which you can find on our website, but again, we want to work with colleagues to strengthen and apply that guidance in very specific contexts. Next slide. So this just shows you some thumbnail images of the different resources that we have on our website. Some of them I've already mentioned, and also that they're talking about the role of the workforce in schools, in health settings, and illustrating that with some examples that we've already come across from our research, but we'd love to hear more from colleagues about that as well. And in the groups, we may have that chance. Next slide, please. That's it from me. I hope I didn't take too long, and really looking forward to the discussion which will follow. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hugh. Just very quickly, one of my first jobs was at the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C., doing sentencing alternatives for juveniles. And I'm not a licensed social worker, but I would have considered myself sort of a paraprofessional in that world. And we did all those things around diversion and sentencing alternatives. And, you know, if I needed a report or something, I would work with a licensed social worker if we needed a formal somebody to come into court or whatever. But it was sort of, that's how I started my career. And I feel like I was so lucky to be able to do that and be on the ground. So there's so much that, you know, you described, and we're gonna, when we go out, we can go to the next slide for just a second. So we're going to be going into some breakout groups. It's not like there's a large number of us, but there's enough that we wanted to give people some time in smaller groups to really get into some of these issues about overcoming stigma around paraprofessionals, integrating social work paraprofessionals and youth-related systems, and the whole concept of credentialing. So I'm just wondering, Zenny in particular, you know, I know, and Rebecca, I'm sure you're working on this too, but you've been doing a lot of work in South Africa that you just might want to just, in particular around child and youth workers, maybe just give a little bit of a uplift about that particular piece of work so we can think about that as we go into the breakout groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it is my pleasure to be here. Just to say that child and youth care is a unique profession. Child and youth care workers are child-focused direct practitioners that work in the life space of children. And when we talk about the life space, we're talking about with children as their lives unfold. And we use ordinary daily life events in ways that are therapeutic and developmental. And we believe that because we have a large number of youth and children in our country, that it's important to develop bottom-up a workforce that actually is responsive to children and youth in their life space, in their community, wherever they are. And we have had the opportunity to scale up the development of child and youth care workers as paraprofessionals, and to obviously look at how would we support their development, their training, and their deployment in South Africa. I could go on some more, but maybe that is sufficient for now.
Right.
Bonnie?
No, that's great. I mean, I think it's some of the work that I came to know the Global Social Services Workforce Alliance around. And so it's wonderful to see how it's getting really going deep and wide. So we didn't know, I don't think there's any particular questions that came up in the chat, Mike. And we want to take advantage of this time that we've got. So I think what we're going to do is just go into our breakouts. People are going to have an opportunity to check. You can see on the list, those are the 3 breakout rooms. And you can pick one. If it ends up that we only have like one person with someone, we may merge, but we hope we have at least 2 or 3 people in each group so we can get into a deeper discussion. And then when we come back, we'll have some opportunity to talk together. Again, this will all be over by in 1 hour. So it's a quick amount of time, but at least it gives people some opportunity to connect. Welcome back, everyone. Well, I hope everybody's discussion was as good as ours.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks to our group, but we got back into the group, but I just wanted to say that we had a great discussion.
Well, good. So I don't know. Well, Rebecca, you started. Who was in your group? Who's going to be reporting back? I can't remember who it was.
Stephanie.
Want to just go first and give us some highlights and what issue it was? Remind us.
Yes, so the group I was in talked about integrating social work paraprofessionals into youth-related systems. And we heard some examples about how this is so important to help young people access services, and some of the ways that you can do that, and this gets to that point on good practices, is really to work through existing groups that exist in the community. So this could be savings and loans groups, youth groups, working with parents and caregivers came up a lot as something that's very important to support communities and young people. One of the things that we heard as needs were needing the policies and guidelines to be able to enable this work and its application consistently, and also thinking about ways to more intentionally integrate the voices of children and youth directly rather than just treating them as people who are receiving these services, but as active participants. Some of the other things that came up as good practices were examples like coaching boys into men, which is an approach that PEPFAR endorses and other organizations around sports. And then there is also the importance of, with so much youth work, being mindful of gender and age specific support. So having those conversations with different age groups. But I want to invite those who were in my group, because I tried to summarize a lot of your incredible inputs very quickly. Anything else you would like to add?
Okay, thank you. And Mike, do you want to talk about when you were with Zenny and the group?
Right. So we had an amazing time with Linda and Zenny, and then we got Moshfik, who I believe was in mute. But we had this amazing discussion. It was really meaningful and fruitful. Linda shared some experiences, but Zenny will report about what happened in our breakout room. Zenny, the microphone is all yours.
You're on mute, Zenny.
So what I shared there was how we developed and scaled up child and youth care workers in South Africa, and how we focused on how do you plan a workforce, how do you develop a workforce, and how you support a workforce, which is aligned to what you had spoken about earlier. And we said that we were very target driven in selecting our workforce. So we looked for unemployed youth in communities that were in communities that had needs, children's needs and youth needs that were specific. So we looked at HIV positive children and youth. We looked at teenage pregnancy. We looked at youth gangs, areas that required the life space work that child and youth care workers could offer. And then we actually went there and recruited unemployed youth in that community, and we trained them in an accredited training in childcare. So it was a training that was sequential, that had modules, that was certificated, that was accredited. And in that way, I think we demonstrated our respectful development and journey of building a workforce. We also provided, like Hugh was talking about, supervision. We called it mentorship, to make sure that the theory that we were training, they were able to implement in practice. So that the link between theory and the link between practice and supervising practice, shadowing, like we talked about it, showing them how to do things. So in a period of 2 years, you ended up with someone with a certificate, an accredited trained child and youth care worker, but at the same time, you have experience because they've got good quality experience because they've been supervised. And of course, that went on with the ongoing parallel advocacy for opportunities to be created for the effective and respectful deployment of child and youth care workers in different settings. So from communities, we went into schools, and we found that we could play a useful role in that space where children are. And that was with the Department of Education. With community work, we were working with the Department of Social Development. So in that way, we've built up a workforce, but always aligned to government, policies and priorities, which is important to if you're looking at sustainability.
Great.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, this is, I hope people will be reaching out and looking at the resources and getting back in touch with, Zenny and Hugh and Rebecca. This is just such an incredibly important piece of such a big puzzle. So because we're going to start to run out of time, and I just wanted to give a brief overview from the credentialing group that was Christy Olenek and Grace Park and Hugh and I. And first of all, I just want to say I'm very excited that Christy said that USAID is actually going to be coming out with a mental health policy, which they've never had before, which is incredibly exciting, since many of us have been focusing on that for a large part of our careers and not sort of never really been legitimized. So we were talking about professionalization in a very broad term, and Hugh gave an example in terms of a comparison about the health system, and the health system has very sort of set things, there's doctors, there's nurses, there's practical nurses, there's licensed practical nurses, there are, physician's assistants, there's nurse practice, there's and people have roles, and some of them aren't, at the, the top, whatever, the most advanced level of, being a quote doctor. But each role in that system is very important to making sure that we're expanding the amount of services that are out here and the numbers of people and the numbers of relationships that people get in different ways. So that's sort of a little bit of a comparison that we could see in terms of, clear lines of responsibility and authority that we could actually see in terms of developing that in the social service workforce impacting young people. And very clear that this is not about dumbing down, that there's various entry points. Social work does have it has a knowledge base, it has a body of knowledge. Many people don't know that. Even people who lead ministries who have the word in it sometimes haven't had the experience and truly understand the impact that this type of work can have across systems and within systems and down deep into communities, into some of the hardest problems that we've got in terms of thinking about violence prevention of young people and building strength to families so that young people don't have to be abused either emotionally or physically. And so there's lots of work that we can be doing in terms of the whole credentialing and thinking about it as young people think about coming into the workforce. Many parents say, why would you want to be a social worker? And can you really, will this be a viable profession for you? But I think as more we really do think about steps and processes and upward mobility, you can start here, you can stay here your whole career if that's what you want to do and you're really great at it, but there are opportunities to move up. And I think the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance is really giving us a lot to build on around all this. So I know it's quick, but we're almost at the end and just want to thank everybody. I don't know if there's some driving point that you'd like to just get across before we leave to the entire audience. Hugh or Zenny or Rebecca, I'll give it over to you for another minute.
I just want to say something. We talked about supervision. I think mentoring is also important, and having a mentor. I think role models and mentors are so crucial because we were hearing from Grace that although she's done a master's in social work, it's still hard for her necessarily to both herself conceive exactly what the role will involve, and also to convince those around her that this is a really credible profession and it has opportunities to it. And when I was in my early 20s and thinking about going into social work, midway through my university degree, I was lucky that my dad actually introduced me to a director of social services from one of the London local authorities. And I could see this is someone who's reached management level, but is still a practicing social worker. And I could see that career path. And it really helped me because I'd done volunteer work and community work, but I couldn't see where the professional path led. But I think we need to diversify that. So it could be a professional path as a child and youth care worker, as Zenny was talking, or it could be a specialist justice worker or a health outreach worker. So that connects to the social determinants of health. So, we will have over time more roles that will come together in a complex interrelated system, but credentialing and recognition is crucial. Thank you.
And if I can just quickly add that speaking of mental health, paraprofessionals can be trained in specialized skills such as trauma-informed care, trauma-informed case management, which is very important when we are dealing with some of the mental health issues. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I could just make the one point as well, is about the value of working together and multidisciplinary teamwork, transdisciplinary teamwork, interrelated work is critical because it's of value to children and youth as well to have various social service practitioners available to them. If you look at the health sector, for example, you don't just have doctors and nurses. You have psychologists, occupational therapists, a range of health service workers that come together. So that's why you advance the services to the people you're servicing and health services. We should do the same in the welfare sector, ensure that for children and youth, we have a broader spectrum of service providers working well together as teams. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zenny, Rebecca, and Hugh. I'm just so thankful that you're doing this work and, just I don't know, to me, this is core. I'll just say a very quick story. When I was working in the DC government and we were working on reforming a case management system at our minimum detention facility for juveniles, my colleague and I stayed one 24-hour period. So we stayed overnight in the girls' cottage, which was a cinder block, very hard. You know, there were about 15 girls in there. We had dinner with them. We wanted to see what the whole evening was like. And we slept on the couch in the sort of the common room. And these girls were really tough. People were scared of them on the street. They were rough. They had done petty larcenies and burglaries and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, whatever. This is before guns were being used so much. And here they were that night rolling their hairs for each other. And out of 10 girls, 8 of them were sitting there sucking their thumbs. And that vision never leaves me to say, who are we really talking about? And what do they really need? And what happened in their lives? And that they're just sort of out here. And so the role of people who can so communicate and work, and it takes time. And you were just talking about trauma-informed care. All this is based on so much trauma that's gone on in young people's lives. So we have lots of opportunities, and I'm hoping that donors and funders and governments will really begin to recognize and uplift this work. So Mike, we got a couple of slides here.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that reflection. And events coming up. You will have the Youth Violence in Public Health, the intersection webinar in April with Reggie Moore, the Director of Violence Prevention Policy and Engagement at the Medical College of Wisconsin. We'll have Gabriela Leva, Citizen Security and Violence Prevention Advisor and Development Professionals, Inc. And for more information, please join www.youthpower.org and sign up for more invitations of this kind of webinars and coffee chat times in the future. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our speakers, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
SSWA.
Have a nice day.
Have a great
All the
evening.
best.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.